Welcome to part 3 of our Save the 120 series. There's been a bunch of changes since our last update in part 2. The clownfish have been moved to their own tank, and we're still testing out Vibrant Reef Cleaner. So don't go anywhere, and let's see how the war on hair algae is going this week. Welcome back to Hackers Reef. If you've been following along in this series, or if you've been following on Instagram, you know there's been a lot of stuff going on, and that's why we're a day late with this video. But let's jump right in. We're going to look at some test parameters and see how we're doing this week. I know the glass looks crystal clear, and I'd love to say that the Vibrant did that, but we actually had to clean it before filming this segment. You can see the parameters aren't that bad. The phosphate's a little bit high, nitrates are good. Still trying to get the alkalinity zeroed in, but it's tough because we have die-off with the coralline algae. That's mostly due to having reduced lighting in the sump after taking the algae scrubber offline. Moving on to the first close-up shot, you can see the hair algae still coming back. It's pretty bad on this side. There hasn't been any manual removal or water changes since the last update. I kind of wanted to just focus on the Vibrant and see if it was actually going to do anything. Because if you remember my theory from the last part of the series, I was kind of concerned that maybe it was the water changes and the Vibrant was just getting the credit for the good maintenance. I've heard people talk about that before, but I'm not going to say that's definitely what's happening here. We're still running the 15 milliliter dose of Vibrant every week. I've heard from the manufacturer and other users that you can dose twice a week, and I think that's where we're at now because I'm not really impressed with the weekly dose. As you can see, it's not doing much with the hair algae at all. The water was a little clearer, and the glass was definitely clearer when I first started dosing it, but again, that could have just been the water changes more than the Vibrant. Every tank is different, so I'm not ready to call BS on this product yet. We're going to do the double dose a week and see where that gets us. Next up, we're looking at where the clownfish used to live. This looks a little bit different because the rock is actually missing. In part 2, I said that the clownfish were even more bitey than usual. It turns out that they decided that this was a great time to lay eggs, and they actually laid a clutch of eggs right on that rock about 5 minutes after I finished recording that video. We're going to be working on some videos that are going to get uploaded soon about the clownfish and the breeding process now that they've been moved to their own tank. If you're interested in seeing that, you can go ahead and click the little subscribe icon that just popped up. That way you won't miss out on any updates about the clownfish now that they have their own home. But aside from the clownfish news, looking over here you can see the hair algae is still dug into the cracks of the rocks. I know I could go in there with a toothbrush and scrub it out, but I was really counting on Vibrant to do a better job of weakening it so it would kind of fall out a bit. Hopefully once I start the second weekly dose, that'll happen, and I'll let you know in the next part of the series. We're going to take a look at some of the coral now. You can see there's a little bit of hair algae floating around in the tank. That's just because I did a little bit of turkey baster spraying off the rocks after I cleaned up the glass. The Monty cap is still getting settled, but we can see there's a mushroom that's trying to creep in on the territory. There's actually one underneath it as well. I'm going to have to definitely go in there with a scalpel and just try to dig out those mushrooms and just get rid of them because they will grow anywhere. They just do not care. The main problem with trying to fight the growth of these mushrooms is they propagate by ripping pieces of their foot. So if you go in there with a scalpel and you start cutting at them, you'll actually be helping to propagate them, and that's why it's kind of like a maintenance thing rather than a removal with those guys. And now we're looking at the rest of our coral frags, and it wouldn't be an update video without a photo bomb from the Hippotang and Foxface. Hippotang always seems to get annoyed when we're filming next to his house. He's very territorial. Or maybe he's still just bitter because I glued in the frags and he can't flip them over and bury them in the sand anymore. Well, speaking of the frags, we can see that there's some hair algae still growing out of that middle zoanthid frag. There's also a healthy infestation of those vermidid snails. They look like little feather dusters, but they're actually tube snails. They let out that slime that kind of irritates the coral. That's a whole other issue for another time. That's the cause of that spiderweb looking slime you see that's around the rock in general. Let's get a closer look at some of these zoanthids. Even though I've been diffusing the light like I explained in the last video, they're still not really opening as much as I'd like. They have very short skirts. They seem to be multiplying slowly, but at least they're not melting away, so I guess that's something to be happy about. I'm going to clean up that tough algae. I just wanted to keep it in here so you could see how it's progressed. Because it was manually removed before, but it grew right back, which means it has some deep roots right in that zoanthid colony. You can see there's a lot of hair algae growing really all around the frame here. You have some on the top, on the left side. It's getting pretty bad over here. Even after the manual removal, just letting it do its own thing has been kind of rough. The mushrooms are obviously not annoyed at all by what we've been doing. They're growing and opening perfectly fine. The button polyps, they're looking good. They're open, also expanding a little bit. The hair algae is about where we left it. It hasn't seemed to have grown much more or receded at all. This is a fairly high flow part of the tank, as you can see by the hair algae kind of swirling around. I'm not going to completely rule out flow as a factor because, as you can see, it's looking better up here where there's more flow. Then when we look down towards the bottom, there's still a good amount of flow, but the hair algae is a lot worse. Some of that definitely has to do with the arrangement of the rock work. I have that one huge power head, and it makes a nice circular gyre flow pattern that gives me some good movement. I mean, it's strong enough that it can excavate all of the sand on the other side of the tank. But no matter what you do, when you have this kind of just rock wall type scape, there's always going to be dead spots, especially the way I have the overflows. There's just no way around it because you just need multiple power heads to hit in there. So with all that said, I'm going to add more flow to the list of things to test if Vibrant doesn't get the job done. We can see our buddy Vincent over here, the bubble tip, that's not really too bubbly anymore. He's a little annoyed with me right now because I went in there with a turkey baster and sprayed off all the rocks. That's a good way to upset him. It's tough to say. He was really stretched out before I did that. I'm still on the fence whether he's trying to sting some more coral for territory or if he's actually trying to split. He's actually really big, so I wouldn't be surprised if he does split. Or maybe it's just because the hippo tank keeps bumping into him like that and he's looking to boost his numbers. I don't know. We just gotta wait and see what happens. But I do have to wonder why the hippo tank keeps bumping into him like that. He just does not care about getting stung. Hopefully we don't wake up and find some nasty scars on the hippo tank, because he's way too big to get trapped, but I know he can get stung pretty bad. Sticking with the hair algae and moving right above, you can see it's still growing up top. Even though, as I said, this is a higher flow area, the hair algae is just sticking wherever it goes. The roots are deep. It just does not seem to be quitting anytime soon. I still have at least 3/4 of that bottle of Vibrant left, and hopefully with this double dose per week, we're going to see some changes. There's still a lot of hair algae. I mean, it's not as big as it was after we did that manual removal. Like if we're looking at this rock all the way on the far left side, where the clownfish used to live underneath their old house, it's just more of the same story with the little short tufts of hair algae and the really dug-in roots in the crevices of the rocks. You would figure the tangs would pick at that, or maybe the snails or the crabs. I do have a bunch of snails in here. It's tough to keep a fully stocked cleanup crew because Puffer goes around and takes them out. She's not super merciless to the point where she'll hunt them to extinction, but you can tell. Sometimes she'll just sit there and watch them, wait till you're not looking. She'll knock them off the glass and then drag them into the rocks. We joke around here that she probably has this giant graveyard of snails and crab shells back there. And here she comes right now. You know, she just floats around, looks for things to murder. You know, you'd think she would go after the vermid snails, but she doesn't seem really interested in those. I guess she just has a refined palate and she's only interested in eating things that cost at least $2 from the fish store. So I think that covers most of the things for this update. Everything's going pretty well with the fish. As you can see, they're really good at eating still, until they get spooked by something strange and then all the food falls down, and you'd think that would contribute to the algae, but they're pretty good at picking it up off the sand, so I don't think that's much of an issue. The crabs get it if it stays down there too long. As you can tell, this is one of the few times that the crabs actually don't have to worry about getting murdered by Puffer, because she kind of just like sits up by the feeding ring and just waits. She's small, so they kind of bounce her around like a volleyball every now and again, but she gets her own spots in there and she'll go just start to chow down. We had to reduce the feeding a little because the clownfish moved out and they're in their own place. The yellow watchman goby, he's still doing his thing in between the rocks when the hippo tang isn't pushing him back in. And then who knows, we might have 2 bubble tips when we shoot the next video update. Leave a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on everything you've seen so far in the series. Are you as not impressed by Vibrant as I am? Do you think I'm doing something wrong? Do you have any recommendations? Maybe you can share your stories where it worked much better for you. I'm not going to lose hope because I know nothing good ever happens fast in this hobby. Usually the only thing that happens really fast are going to be the bad things. Whenever you want something good to happen, your best coral frag to grow, whatever we're talking about, it's always going to take time and patience. So that's really what comes with the territory. Lots of patience, but you still want to make sure that what you're doing is pushing you in the right direction. Because even if it's slow, you still want some forward progress. That might not be easy to see right away, but after a month or so, if you're not seeing any improvement at all, then it could be a good time to go and tweak your direction a little bit. Most importantly, don't do too many things at once, because if you do find something that magically cures your problem and you started testing 5 different things, you're never going to know what actually solved it, and that's really going to mess with you. So go slow, be patient, and hopefully it'll all work out in the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Most important, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done that. Hit that little bell icon next to the subscribe button so you get notifications when we post new videos. We have lots of great stuff in the works.